Our last student presentation of the evening is Monica Nelson.
Hi, I'm Monica Nelson. Thank you all for sticking through this whole presentation. My research is an investigation into the material representations of the historical narratives of women within house museums. House museums are domestic spaces preserved for reflection or education. There are over 15,000 in the United States alone, and each one offers a potential answer to the question, how does it feel to walk into history? Are these preserved spaces forces of actual knowledge production, or are they simply ornate mausoleums? And how can the design of them represent history? Because history itself has an unremarkable ambiance in everyday life. It lies dormant, like a piece of the Berlin Wall in a Madison Avenue lobby, a Confederate monument on a college campus, a quilt, or a piece of antique furniture, or a brown governmental highway sign that you simply drive by. But what I realized early on is that no matter how skillfully each marker of time was preserved, it was rendered inactive, waiting to be pulled into focus, as history's relevance lies only in the present. And as we've seen in the last half-decade, many markers of history have been jolted into our attention, asking us to reconsider the way we absorb narratives about the past. I set close parameters on this research because of the vastness of the subject itself. I visited over a dozen of these house museums and spoke to a wide range of historians, docents, directors of estates, curators, artists, cultural tourists, and to the National Trust a lot. And what I found was that most of these narratives were being reconsidered. And I saw potential for mining of new narratives that could be useful today. This is a map of the houses of the women I mentioned in my work. These ones in red are the one that I spent more time with. My research is like a Russian nesting doll. History is nested in design, nested in place, and supported by 3 central case studies. The houses of 3 women situated in the American South. Each is in a present stage of reevaluation and reinterpretation in 3 very different ways. The women I looked at are Nina Simone, Rosa Parks, and Flannery O'Connor. I positioned these women's stories at the heart of this work as a microcosmic study of a larger scene. And what I noticed early was that all 3 of these women had complicated relationships to each of the southern towns that their legacies are being preserved in. Flannery's residence at Andalusia was demarcated by illness, and the last time that Nina Simone was in Tryon was in 2001 for her mother's funeral. Her earliest memories are of performing her first recital at age 12 and her parents being moved from the front row to make room for the white members of the church. This formative experience was something she talked about increasingly as she grew into her role as a civil rights activist in her later years. The house preserved of Rosa Parks is one that she fled Montgomery, Alabama for, having received an excessive amount of unwanted attention following the bus boycotts. This house, in 2015, was dismantled and transported to Berlin as a sculpture by the American artist Ryan Mendoza. In my research, I followed the tour of the house as it traveled from Detroit to Berlin to Rhode Island, and is currently in storage in the care of an auction house in New York State. The frame of the house, when installed, is intended to incite conversation about the lasting impact of racial inequality in the United States, and to serve as a monument, though I guess a mobile monument, of civil rights. In the writing of this section, I look at some of the other material culture that's ascribed to Parks, including the exact bus she sat on, which is now in Detroit at the Henry Ford Museum. But overall, with the multiple representations of this house, we see an overly complex trajectory of a space representative of a woman who simply declared she would not move. Early on, I let Flannery O'Connor guide my work. In it, she describes the myopic advantage of simply looking at something. The bomb dropped on Hiroshima affects life on the Oconee River, and there's nothing he can do about it. In my second case study, I visited and studied the representation of Flannery O'Connor's home, Andalusia, which is located in Milledgeville, Georgia. Andalusia is where she wrote the majority of her seminal works and where she spent the last 13 years of her life. For those who aren't aware, O'Connor was a novelist and an expert practitioner of the short story. Her narratives are direct, allegorical, and have an exquisite materiality or stuffness to them. The objects featured in her stories, even when quotidian, carry a heavily elusive weight. The house at Andalusia has seen several phases of evaluation following her death in 1964. It was listed on the National Register of Historic Places in 1980, but kept in the family until 2003 when it was turned into an ad hoc museum run by a private foundation that employed unusual fundraising efforts like harvesting the pine trees on the property and renting the dining room for private parties. But the most complex design challenge was perhaps Flannery herself, as she was someone who resisted identification. She protested the idea that a person could be one-dimensional, refused to succumb to being perceived as a flat image, and denied anyone in her path the opportunity to categorize her concretely. Yet in the decades since her death, there have been countless material attempts to personify her, all of which have failed. In 2015, there was discontent over her immortalization on a US postage stamp. The image used seemed to have been put through a filter that filled in the lines of her face as if she was pumped full of collagen and spritzed with rose water. Her complexion glowed with a youthful exuberance instead of the sallow gaze indicative of a seer of the grotesque. This exact competition of ideas, innocence and cynicism, has muddled the perception of O'Connor over the years. It seems impossible for history to understand how one woman could embody both light and dark, could be so steeped so deeply in the moors of the Jim Crow South, yet write such illuminating text regarding the way that people lived in society together. The main focus of the restoration, now in the hands of Georgia College, is to return the house to its exact specifications as when Flannery lived there. There is no interest in romanticizing the property or embellishing it with any artifacts that were not directly related to the home, which seems appropriate, as she was interested in her now. Her stories functioned with the confidence of a point-and-shoot camera. She shot from the hip, and she drew all of her stories from the landscape in front of her. I've always thought of design as a lens to see the world. I'm interested in the way design is absorbed seamlessly into culture, how it adapts and changes, and how in this work it acts as a catalyst for learning about the past. In the posthumous representations of these houses, design is integral. Design is what renders these ephemeral ideas concrete and fosters the idea that object narratives can carry the weight of exponentially larger stories about culture, that an entire life can be contained in a tabletop, that a monument or historical marker can revise its own meaning over time by simply being tangibly represented. It's within my third case study, Nina Simone's childhood home, that the most evocative design challenge exists. The North Carolina house was procured, purchased, and fast-tracked through as a national treasure in 2017 by 4 African-American artists and members of the local Tryon community. The house, similar to Rosa Parks, contains no material culture belonging to her. This is staged for right now. Therefore, the physical space will rely entirely on the spectral presence of Simone, becoming a frame in which culture is created within. A physical space can only highlight the void of a life, a freezing of a moment in time. And it's a void which asks the viewer to then find themselves in it, a fixed image which has the potential to point at the infinite. History is innately reliant on the time in which it was recorded. It's a palimpsest. It exists in volumes to be added to. And within these houses are niche spaces for re-evaluation and ultimately for the inclusion of more complex stories in a larger narrative of history. These houses have the opportunity to both localize and redesign the experience of history. Thank you.